Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Kim Woodworth, and I have the great pleasure of serving as the Executive Director for the Economic Development Council of Colorado. Just a few housekeeping items before we start. You have entered into this webinar on mute for recording quality purposes, but that doesn't mean we don't want to hear from you. We encourage you all to ask questions of our presenters today. You can type them into the chat section at the bottom of your screen or raise your hand using the reactions button. Today's event is to educate, bring new ideas, and best practices forward. If you have questions of our after this webinar, please send them to EDCC's administrator at bobby.blank@edcconline.org. We will follow up after today's webinar with a link to the webinar and presentation. We will also post it to our website on the webpage dedicated to the Knowledge Network series. And finally, please follow us today, our discussion today on social media outlets at EDC of Co. And be sure to use the hashtags KNS 2026 and EDCC events so that we can follow you. For those of you who are new to us, EDCC is a statewide industry association that supports economic development efforts across Colorado. We connect our communities, our members, and our partners to the high-quality educational opportunities and trusted resources, and advocate for sound policies and programs that support a vibrant economy and enhance quality of life for all of Colorado. We come from a variety of settings. We are rural and urban, public and private, profit, for-profit and not-for-profit, and include communities, counties, and regional organizations, local and state government, chambers of commerce, universities, and private industry. We have been building a virtual arsenal of all of this information to keep our professionals updated on the latest trends, data, and case studies and thought leadership papers that you all can take back to your local leaders to begin these important discussions. Make this feature a part of your ongoing professional development and tool that you can use to help inform, educate, and transform the community. Bobby will be dropping those links into the chat section. We have a lot of fun stuff coming up here in 2026. So before we move on, please mark your calendars and register now for our most important annual event, EDCC's Legislative Luncheon and Day at the Capitol. The luncheon is a key platform for influence. This is where we foster direct dialogue, build essential relationships with lawmakers, and advocate for sound policies that directly support a strong and growing Colorado economy. By attending, you ensure the collective expertise and concerns of our economic development community and make sure that they're at the forefront in legislative decisions. Immediately following is our Day at the Capitol, which is designed to demystify the legislative process for every economic development professional. We will walk through the process, showing you exactly how to navigate the Capitol and successfully provide testimony that shapes legislation. Your voice matters, and this event empowers you to use it to support our vital economy. So that's January 29th, and we will be at the First Baptist Church of Denver for the luncheon and then the Capitol in the afternoon. Also, here's our calendar for 2026. In March, we will be on the road going through our 5 regions with our regional roundtable. So if you're interested in hosting a location, please reach out to Bobby or myself. Also, we are thrilled to announce that our annual signature event, the Drive Lead Succeed Conference, will be held September 27th through the 30th in the beautiful and historic city of Cripple Creek. And it will be at the brand new Chamonix Resort and Hotel. Reserving your hotel room and registering will be urgent this year, as the entire town only has 500 rooms and it's prime leaf peeping season. We will be launching an early bird campaign in the coming week to help jumpstart the registration process on that. Again, links will be dropped into the chat section for you. And for those of you who have been really wanting to really get the basics, the fundamentals of basic economic development, our course, which is annual, will be held June 8th through the 12th. The location will be determined here soon. But this is really a substantial and intensive introduction to the theory and fundamentals of comprehensive economic development. This 5-day schedule emphasizes beneficial development resulting from local action and revolves around 5 major themes. innovative community concepts, regional economics, basic economic development factors, core economic development techniques, and emerging trends. Now, without further ado, let's turn our attention to today's core topic. This session, exploring the intersection of business and municipal finance, was a highly requested topic in your event surveys. You asked, and we are delivering. As economic developers, we play a unique and often challenging role, balancing the need of various stakeholders in our communities while acting as key resources for both municipal and business leadership. Join us now as we explore this critical intersection. We'll discuss the challenges facing both sectors and analyze the unique and nuanced role that economic developers play in successfully serving these two masters. Leading this important conversation today is our moderator, Mike Vandenbosch. Mike is a financial analyst for Brocade Communication System. Mike is also a valued instructor for our financial portion of the Basic Economic Development course. We're also happy to welcome back as a recovering economic developer, having most recently served with the City and County of Broomfield. So everyone, let's give Mike a warm Zoom welcome in a typical Zoom fashion with your clapping emojis. Mike, please take it away.
Sure. All right. Just make sure I've got my.
I love it.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining. Yes, I get to the pleasure of moderating the two other panelists today, talking about economic developers and the impact on municipal and business finance. So just to give you a little bit of idea of what we're going to cover today, I'm going to kind of go through really the basic points of the tug between municipal and business finance. I really want to start by discussing why these things start to matter, and get into some basics of business finance. Now, if you've been to the EDC course, where I've talked about economic development finance, some of this might be a little bit repetitive, but there are some, I think, more concrete points that I brought in, and we're going kind of a little bit deeper into business finance specifically, and then talking a little bit about the impacts that you guys have on business finance in your community, and ultimately how that impacts your municipal finance. Then David Starnes is going to be talking about development finance and URAs and just the different tools that are available. And then we have Stacy Brown, who's going to be talking about municipal finance. And so we're kind of covering the basics of really all three of the big pillars that really matter to you guys. And then we're going to kind of wrap it up by talking about economic developers and how is this relevant? What are you supposed to do? Really kind of tie all of these things together for you so that you understand what the takeaways are and what the next steps are. So I am Mike Vandenbosch. I am a principal. I have a side business called Canary Analytics where I provide fractional CFO services to moving and storage companies. My day job is working as a financial analyst for Brocade Communication Systems. Brocade is owned by Broadcom, which is a large chip manufacturer. If anybody's paying attention to the AI stuff, you've probably heard of Broadcom. So I spend my day staring at numbers, living in spreadsheets, working in profit and loss statements and balance sheets. And that's kind of my role. And that's why I'm talking about business finance. That's where I'm most engaged. I want to have David, if you could take a moment, I wanted you to, pardon me, introduce yourself and discuss a little bit about what you do and your background.
Thanks, Mike. Good morning, everyone. My name is David Starnes. So I'm the principal and owner of Civic Strategy Development. So we're a real estate development consulting firm. So we do real estate development and also real estate development consultings. And I'm a former public sector urban renewal director for the city of Longmont, recovering. So bring the perspective of working in the public sector as well as the private sector. So happy to be here. Thank you.
And then Stacy, if you could introduce yourself.
Good morning, everyone. Stacy Brown, town manager for the town of Kersey. I spent 25 years in economic development all along the Front Range of Colorado, and the last 2 years in the town of Kersey, being the town manager. And so it's kind of doing dual roles, though. I still work as the town manager, but I also am still doing economic development for the town as well.
Great. So, introduction. What are we doing here? So, ultimately, right, we have two goals. You're serving essentially two masters, right? Most of you are working in with private sector businesses to try to bring them into your community, and those businesses, of course, are there to help grow your tax base. Obviously, these businesses are looking to pay as little in taxes and fees as they possibly can to operate their business, which is essentially how you guys fund your public sector functions. So really, the goal here is to talk about these competing demands for your communities, because your private sector is trying to minimize their expense and the public sector is trying to provide services to the community. Um, these things are really very fluid, I would say, based on the businesses that are coming into your community and essentially the makeup of your community. Um, Private sector businesses, their goals are going to be very much ownership dependent. And so, as we go through this, I want you to kind of keep that in mind that, certainly as a independent owner of a small company, their sensitivity to expenses and to the P&L is going to be very different than if you're sitting down with those that are representing a large corporation. And sophistication comes into it. How well do they manage their expenses? How well do they track their expenses? As companies get bigger, of course, they are a little bit more sophisticated than smaller businesses. And all of this is going to be very important for you guys to understand in the context of if you're offering incentives or if you're offering services, what those benefits look like and how those are received and are they valuable? The typical what I'll call MBA answer for what is the private sector, what is a business goal, right? What is their purpose is to, maximize shareholder value. What that means very much depends again on how the business is structured. So it's growing revenue, it's controlling expenses. That's how we, maximize equity or shareholder value. But it's also can be a bit soft, a little bit softer. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And one of the last things I want to talk about, at least from goals from the private sector, is they have different masters that they serve, not just the customer, not just the owner, not just the board, if they're one that exists, but right, they also have obligations to their lenders and any investors that have been brought in. So it's important to kind of know kind of the nuance in these companies as well, because again, that's going to really impact what you're offering. On the public sector side, of course, public health and safety, quality of life, in building and maintaining infrastructure, democratic governance. These are the things these are the goals of your municipalities or the municipalities that you're serving, and certainly managing local resources. So there is kind of, as I mentioned, right, this pull between businesses get taxed, municipalities provide services, and it's looking about finding that happy medium and ultimately how you serve your businesses and communicate those things to them. So really what it comes down to, and in living in the private sector, it's all about measurement, right? So at least in the business that I work in, it's very much about how do you measure the things that you want to have an impact on, and how are we compensated in the private sector in some instances depends on those measurements, right? Do you get a bonus this year? Do you not get a bonus this year? Do you get a raise this year? Do you not get a raise this year? Do you have a job at the end of the week or not, based on the measurements that have been kind of handed down from management? So all of these people that you're going to be talking to on the private sector have some way that they're being measured or some way that they're measuring their business's success. A lot of these are going to fall along the lines of typical revenue financial metrics, revenue growth, margins, both gross margins and net margins, operating profits, EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization, earnings per share, and also just like compliance with generally accepted accounting principles. Again, for more sophisticated companies that are engaged in, public reporting. On the public sector side, right, the measurements are going to be, especially on the economic development side, tax-based growth, management of fiscal resources, public safety response times, crime rates, things that are going to either shine a light positively or negatively on the community that your municipal leaders are going to either be proud of or ashamed of. It may be a good way to put it. And really the goal here is how do you align these measures? How do you align everybody's efforts so that everybody's working towards the same goal, and that's ultimately how the fine line that economic developers get to walk. So there's this conflict, right? You have municipalities, they have their operations and infrastructure investment. They are kind of seeding development. This development creates new tax base. This new tax base creates new public revenue, and then that gets funneled back into the municipal coffers to be able to do either more operations or invest in more infrastructure and seed development, and around and around and around we go. Um, so for the private sector side, right, their taxes and fees decrease profitability, right? This is the conflict that exists between these two particular entities. So you've got constantly changing needs for businesses, attracting top talent, accessing access to infrastructure. That could be either kind of the hard infrastructure, like thinking about like roads. It could be more of like access to fiber, right? The things that you guys hear about from your businesses every day. Secure investments. So they have to continually find ways to fund their operations. And when they finally do kind of, add on to their building, or they bring in new equipment, they make sure that, right, that people aren't breaking in and taking their stuff, and that their assets are secure in the community that they're in. And then, in a big way, access to financial resources as well. So, if you think about businesses and the way I look at it, businesses are very inwardly focused a lot of times. They kind of have their blinders on. They're not necessarily paying attention to what's going on in your community, and that's important to know, because you might think, well, this is in the news. This is everywhere. I completely understand what's going on here, and your businesses are completely oblivious to it. Sorry, I know I covered up some of this with my circle graph here, so I'll move this over for the presentation when I send it out. But essentially, what I'm trying to say is, on the public sector side, right, you have changing demands. You have drivers that are basically managed by your municipal leaders. That could be your elected officials who are basically discussing what the changing demands are for a community, right? That could be, you have a complete sweep of new people coming in to run your community, and they have completely different ideas about how economic development should be done, or how different ways the community should be run. And of course, these are going to have very big impacts on your businesses, because a changing landscape is not predictable. And the one thing that businesses absolutely hate is unpredictability and surprises. I can't say this enough, right? Surprises are absolutely hated in business. And so we want to be able to kind of know what's coming up and be able to plan for it. And of course, communities are very externally focused. And so, this is kind of where I say sometimes we're a bit naive to the awareness of what we're having, right? Or what we're doing. We think, oh, this has already been kind of reported. Of course, the businesses are aware. Not so, right? They're focused on day to day. They've got their measures, they've got their orders, they have to kind of move forward. And so you kind of have to bring them out a bit. So we'll start with a poll about business finance. Bobby, there you go. So what financial challenge do businesses in your community struggle with the most? All right. So, okay, access to startup capital, access to growth expansion capital, lack of financial literacy and planning. Okay. Uh, High interest rates, cost of borrowing. Good. And then I appreciate those people who are kind of willing to admit I have absolutely no clue. I am completely oblivious to what's going on in the background of these companies. It's fair. So, very basically, right, let's just start with a foundation, and let's talk a little bit about how businesses make money, right? I think this is all relatively simple, straightforward, but businesses make money by selling goods, services, subscriptions, maybe providing advertising. And you can think about this from maybe just a little bit creatively, if you think about it, right? So they may not be a business that's in advertising, like, like Google selling ads. It could be, for example, like a moving company that I work with, they could be selling space on the side of a truck as they're driving down the road. They're advertising, they're selling space to be able to advertise. It could be they're selling space on their website to be able to advertise. It could be project-based revenue, where it could be very, very specific, very unique, and very outside of what I'd say the general operations of the company. And this could be just a special project that the owner has taken on, and they're like, I'm running it through the company, and it's going to have a huge impact potentially. And it could be this thing that takes off, and it could take my company to the next level. So we kind of look at it as what's your main revenue sources, and then what are your other revenue sources. And it's really important to know for your businesses how they make money, of course, because how they make money is going to impact their ability to grow in your community. And changes in your community and changes in the broader economic landscape is going to impact their ability to exist, right? It's just a constant struggle for these businesses to be able to operate. There's a never-ending challenge. Every day, there's just a new list of demands that are coming in from employees, from vendors, from banks, from just about everywhere, from customers, that have to be solved. And so there are a lot of times I work with clients where I say, this is maybe not a revenue stream that is worth pursuing. The amount of time it takes to be able to kind of capture this revenue is just not worth, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. So again, those are, that's part of knowing what the potential is for the business in your community. You have non-operating revenues, and these are going to be important, if you can kind of get a glimpse into what these are, because it's also going to tell you what's happening at the company. We call these non-operating because they're not core to what the business does. So this would be rents and subleases, right? If they're subleasing space or they own a building and they're renting that building to somebody else, and you see that growing over time, it's potential maybe they're moving operations elsewhere. Proceeds from the sales of assets, it's a non-operating revenue, right? We buy a truck for $100,000, it depreciates $50,000. I was able to sell it for 75K. That means I got made 25K more than I thought I was going to make. And so they would show that on their P&L as this proceeds from assets. And so that is also an indicator of business health, right? Are they selling assets? That generally is a red flag of, all right, if they're selling assets, are they contracting? Is there a problem? Is there an immediate need for cash within the business? Interest on savings, investment returns, foreign exchange gains. These are going to be all other revenue sources that you're going to potentially see from businesses if you actually have a chance to be able to look into their financial landscape. Again, important to know because it's how the business is financed and how it's structured and where the money is coming from. Conversely, right, how do businesses spend money? Well, this is kind of important to know. Businesses are all structured very, very differently, and there is no one universal way in which they have to spend and recognize expenses of money. There are guidelines, but there is nuance in how businesses are able to do this. So we have our cost of goods sold, which the way that I generally explain this to people is, if you think about it, right, what is the thing that a company does? And what is the thing that they do to make money? So if they're making money, their cost of goods sold is basically the thing that they have to do to make that money. For example, right, if the CEO is not necessarily engaged in the day-to-day of, I'm going to use moving because that's kind of what I know best. If they're not actually out there moving, if they're not out there, working in the storage facility, if they're not doing the day-to-day labor, they're not a cost of goods sold, right? It's the guy who's on the truck, who's driving the truck. It's the person who's loading and unloading. It's the people that are basically managing the inventory in the warehouse. It's the inventory that's moving back and forth, like boxes and shrink wrapped going to customers. Those are cost of goods sold. They're variable. And the way that it's best to think about it is, if this company did absolutely nothing today, that cost should be zero. That's the nature of this variable cost. The CEO is still going to get paid as long as they have some money. So that's kind of a fixed cost. But in the most part, right, if a company, if there's no jobs on the log for them to be able to book, they're not going to be paying any laborers. They're not going to be buying any inventory. They're not going to be doing anything. So those variable costs are going to be zero. That's essentially how we look at costs. That's how we designate cost of goods sold. The next is our operating expenses. And operating expenditures are really what I'll just say, those are more the fixed costs. We also call them SG&A, sales and general administration expenses. And this is usually where everything else goes: rent, utilities, advertising, CEO salaries, admin salaries, insurance costs. These are fixed. So even if the company does not do any moves this week, they're still going to have to make an insurance premium payment. And so those costs are recognized as an operating expenditure. The reason it's important to know the delineation between these two is because cost of goods sold are treated very differently from operating expenses, because operating expenses are very much fixed. They are kind of seen as this daily occurring thing that they call it, you might have heard the term overhead. Overhead, we're always looking to try to reduce overhead. So operating expenses are one of the areas that people spend a lot of time trying to find ways to reduce operating expenses. And cost of goods sold are a little bit harder to pin to manage because there is a variable component to it. And so a lot of times we spend effort focused on operating expenses, and especially when it comes to taxes and the fees and the things that are happening in your community, this is where most of those expenses are going to land. It's not going to be cost of goods sold. It's going to end up in this operating expenditure category. The last area is this capital expenses. So I want you to think of capital expenses as like big purchases. So when a business goes out, again, moving company goes out and they buy a truck and they spend $100,000 on a truck, they don't just say on their profit and loss statement, "Hey, I spent $100,000 on a truck." And then, of course, if they do that and they're a small moving company, they look like they're losing a lot of money. That's generally not how it's done in business. We have what we call capitalization thresholds. We say if an expense hits these particular types of classifications and it's over this threshold of, let's say, 2,500 bucks, we capitalize it, and we basically say this is an asset to us. We're going to put it on our balance sheet. We're going to recognize it as an asset, and then we're going to do this thing called depreciation, and we're going to take little chunks of this purchase over a period of time, and we're going to move it into our operating expenses, and we're going to say, hey, I bought this truck 5 years ago. In year 4, I'm going to depreciate a portion of it, and so I'm going to recognize a portion of it on my P&L. And the reason for doing this is to basically spread this expense, this asset expense, over the time that the thing is being used. That's really important to know, especially in today's landscape, because the graphic here I've got on the left when we talk about AI, which is another area I'm kind of involved in, right? The discussion of these expenses, right? The investment here, we're talking trillions of dollars of capital investment. That's what's important to know. Is this is not just, hey, Google's going to spend $500 billion in the next 2 years doing whatever, and then you're going to see their profitability drop by $500 billion. You're going to see changes, and those are going to be basically not necessarily recognized immediately on the P&L. So if you're looking, the point I want to make here is if you're looking at a company's profit and loss statement, you're making judgments on how a company is operating, there's a whole other component that needs to be taken into consideration. So capital expenses fall into a few categories. We have tangible and intangible. Tangible will be like vehicles and real estate and equipment. Intangible is going to be like software, patents and trademarks, borrowing fees. These are kind of those typical capitalized expenses that we end up then recognizing over a period of time. So I've talked a little bit about the P&L. I've talked a little bit about the balance sheet. I want to kind of just double click on that for a moment, just to give you, again, a good baseline for what these are, right? These are the business financial statements. When a business reports their financial condition, they're really required to provide most of the time just two of these three statements, but generally they should be providing all three. The first is kind of like, I call it the rock star. This is the one everybody loves to see. This is one everybody knows, the profit and loss statement. It's also known as the income statement or the statement of earnings. This is a report that looks at revenues and expenses over a period of time. So it could be a month, it could be a quarter, it could be a year. But profit and loss is basically a time-bound report that reports on operating expenses and operating revenues and non-operating revenues, as well as expenses, your cost of goods sold and your operating expenses, or OPEX, as we generally call it. At the end of your profit and loss statement, you have this nice little number called the net income, and that tells you, based on all of the stuff that you've done, have you made money or not over this particular period of time. That that net income number ends up on the balance sheet. And the balance sheet is basically used to show us the financial condition of the company. And so we look to see what are we call it the sources and uses of capital to be able to get this company off the ground. So the balance sheet, which is also known as the statement of financial position, is a snapshot in time. It basically says today, this company has X amount of debt, it has X amount of assets, it has X amount of liabilities. And this is how these things are made up. So we would look at, if we looked at one of my clients' balance sheets today, we would see cash, we would see short-term investments, maybe if they put money into, let's say, an investment account because they have cash they don't need for operations today. And then they've got the fixed assets they purchased, a bunch of trucks. Maybe if they're not too sophisticated, maybe they have real estate on there. And then they'll have other things on there as well. Assets would include like intangible assets, like I had mentioned, like if they have trademarks or copyrights, those might be on the balance sheet and under assets. Under liabilities, you'll see loans, short-term loans and long-term loans. So, hey, we have a line of credit that we pull against. We have funding that's coming in from the owners they're offering it to us as a loan. We have these long-term loans that we took out to pay for these trucks, to pay for the real estate that we purchased. And then we also have equity, which is, right, the owner puts money in, or maybe an outside party puts money in. And this is where, we look at these liabilities and equities. We look at this as like, how do we fund the business? So the reason this is important to know, and the reason that net income is on the balance sheet, is that money that's generated from operating the company is equity, and it helps fund the company. So if you make $100,000 of revenue in net profit, right? You net $100,000 of revenue, and you actually have that in the account, right? You can invest that in the business. This is equity that just keeps building the business. So that's why it's on the balance sheet. So the balance sheet is like kind of the less popular of it's the middle child. I guess I'll call it that way. It's the middle child of the financial statements. Not really, kind of glamorous. And I would say when I look at most companies, their balance sheet's usually kind of a mess. It could be actually functionally a mess, or it could just be not well maintained. And I find that mostly to be the case. The one that most people don't really look into is this statement of cash flows, which I find kind of funny. I think it's one of the more important statements, but this is basically kind of showing you like, hey, the net income, there's all this stuff that's going on the P&L, and there's all this stuff that's going on in the balance sheet. The cash flow statement like ties it all together. And ultimately, at the end of the cash flow statement, we can look and we can say, did this company actually generate cash from the thing that they're doing, right? If they're a moving company and they're operating, are they actually generating revenue by their operations? Or are they just borrowing, and their cash balance continues to grow, but their liabilities are growing, even faster? So this is the way this statement kind of ties everything together. And it really shows, hey, based on all these things that happened in the company, we paid debt. We got money in from a lender. We had the owner took money out for his own personal use. We generated money from net income. It basically condenses all of this thing into one thing. It says, here's the cash balance at the beginning of the period. Here's the cash balance at the end of the period. And here are the things that happened that make that move. So we start out with operating, which is operations of the company. Did we make money from operating the company? The second is investing. Did we put money into purchasing assets? Did we sell assets? Did we put money into, let's say, an investment account, kind of that traditional investment? And then the final one is financing. Did we borrow? Did we pay down loans? Did the owners put money into the business? So again, this is really giving you a really deep dive into how this business is actually operating. So I'm going to go into just a few concepts that I just feel are kind of important to know. Working capital. Working capital is essentially the money that a company has to be able to operate, right? They need working capital to do stuff. That's to maybe, if they're a manufacturer, they need working capital to be able to invest in raw materials, convert that into a final product, and deliver it to the customer. The reason this is important to know is that working capital has this cycle. And businesses are essentially required to put money into working capital. And then they have to basically, well, I'll say invested in working capital, and then they have to wait to basically pull that money back out. And if you think about it, right, they have to buy for a manufacturer, they'd have to buy stock from a supplier. They have to pay that supplier for that stock. They have to manufacture it, right? They have to do something with it. They have to sell it to the customer. And then in a lot of cases, the customers are given what we'll call payment terms, right? Hey, here's your invoice, pay me in 30 days. Then they have to wait to collect that money back. So a company could be waiting up to, 120 days after they put money into working capital to actually get it back out. And this is really important to know because what we'll notice with companies that are growing really, really quickly, their working capital needs grow exponentially. And the term that I heard when I was first starting out in finance was from a banker. He said, some businesses are really good at going broke making money. And this is how it happens, right? They don't have enough capital to be able to fulfill orders. And then the wheels start to come off the bus because they don't have the resources they need to be able to keep the machine running. And then all of a sudden, lenders are banging on the door, suppliers are banging on the door, suppliers are cutting them off, so they're not able to purchase the stock to be able to fulfill the orders, even though they have sufficient orders for it. So it's important to know where your companies, what stage of life your companies are in, and how they're investing their capital and what their kind of workflow or their working capital situation looks like. So, if you think about this from how companies invest capital, right, we have a working capital need for a company. We also have the needs to be able to plan for asset purchases, and we have the need to be able to acquire and install those assets to be able for the company to be able to use them. And then we have to keep those assets operating. And so, right, we have this long-term investment we need to make in assets to be able to keep them operating and basically spitting out money for us. So if we're a manufacturer, we're investing in a machine and we're planning, we're acquiring, we're utilizing, we're maintaining, and then eventually that thing just needs to get replaced, right? For a moving company perspective, eventually the truck breaks down and it just is not worth replacing anymore, and we have to replace it. So there's this working capital component, there's an investing capital component. Um, and it all depends on what the life cycle of the company. And so I want to just kind of cover just very briefly this continuum of life cycles for companies. You have kind of that seed startup development phase of a company where their working capital needs are really intense. They need money to be able to do the thing, and they're doing this what we're calling minimum viable product, proving their concept. They're getting customer validation. Then eventually they move into this product iteration and improvements and they need investing capital. Now all of a sudden they've proved in the concept. Now they need to start to scale. And so they need money to be able to grow their company and invest in the equipment and really start to bring their dream to life. And this is really capital intensive. The next stage is growth, and now they're just on the search for customers, right? They've built the base. Now they need to fill it. Now they need people to order from them, and they want to just basically take this thing and they want it to shoot off like a rocket, right? So now they have working capital needs, and as they're scaling, they also have investing capital needs because now they're probably looking at where we're maxing out on their capacity. Eventually, they move into what we'll call this expansion, right? Now you can kind of think of this more geographically. I've done really well in Chicago. I've done really well in Kentucky. Now I want to move to California. Now I want to move into Florida. Now I want to move into Texas, and I need now investing capital to make this happen. I kind of have the template down. I know how I'm running my company. I've got it efficient. Now I just need the money to be able to replicate this across maybe geographic lines. And eventually companies get to this kind of maturity phase, right? They kind of top out. They've kind of saturated the market. They've got maybe a really steady base of a really steady market share. And now all of a sudden, how do you grow? You can either acquire, maybe you're kind of like, all right, I'm ready to kind of wind this down. I'm going to sell the business, I'm going to divest through an acquisition, right? Or I'm going to start investing in new products. I really want to start juicing this growth again. And companies can stay there for a long time. Some of them move into this kind of decline renew phase, which is, I think the best aspect or the best example of this would be like Sears, right? Goes through all of this and then kind of just goes away. They either phase out, they're restructured in bankruptcy. Now all of a sudden their needs are very much working capital. Now it's like, how do we keep the lights on? We have all these investments, these that we've invested in real estate, we've invested in all these operations, we've invested in all this equipment. Now it's not being utilized. Now I need working capital to be able to keep this thing moving, this machine running. And maybe here they're selling off assets, right? So really important to know where the companies in your community are fit within this continuum, because that's going to very much depend on where their money is being invested, which is, of course, going to is going to dictate where their costs are going to lie and how sensitive they're going to be to and receptive they're going to be to the incentives that your community offers. So businesses generally do financial planning and budgeting, and so it's worth knowing. There is kind of for businesses, when you look at their financial statements, their sophistication is going to vary depending on their size. As detailed as they're going to be is going to depend on, again, how sophisticated they are, and whether they're really truly planning. So companies do have to go through the process of planning each year and each quarter to know where money is going. And so this is a shifting landscape. Most businesses are looking at this, if not monthly, they're looking at it quarterly. And the changes are being made kind of in an instant. And knowing how, let's say, loan payments basically fit into how companies budget, it's going to be kind of important, right? If they have a heavy debt load, they could be very, very profitable, but they're spend all the money that they're generating is going to pay off the loan with the bank. There's not a whole lot left for the owner, which means if there's not a long-term play here, what's their incentive to be able to keep doing this long term? So why does this matter? How do your companies in your community make money, right? How do changes in local fees and taxes impact your business's profitability? And how do you align the interests of your community with that of the business and vice versa? And what types of expenses do they incur that are going to impact their profitability? And this is just kind of being more aware of more, I would say, kind of, macroeconomic events to kind of understand, hey, this thing's happening. It's probably going to be a big impact on this company, which could potentially impact their plans for expansion. What type of incentives have the biggest impact, right? So if you are a service business, coming to a service business like mine and saying, hey, we're going to offer you a business personal property tax exemption or rebate, probably isn't going to be as impactful to me as, let's say, a manufacturer who actually has a lot of equipment that is going to be taxed. And I know there are exemptions and there are certain tax benefits of different types of companies. All that in mind, the impact is going to be based on the scale of the company and what type of investments they make. And so it's really important to know if you're coming and you're offering an incentive that they can't take advantage of, it's great. And you're going to get a lot of smiling and nodding, but you're not going to hear back from them because it's just not worth their time. And then it allows you to better position your local community policy for tax and programs. So, hey, here are the things that we're doing in our community that are going to be beneficial to your company. That these are the things that you're looking for that you think is going to be beneficial to your operations, and these are the things that are going to. This is how what we're doing is going to ultimately benefit you. Yes, there's a cost to it, but here are the benefits. So again, it gets back to kind of that communication with your companies, understanding what's going on in your community and how that ultimately all starts to kind of trickle down into the actual economic landscape for your community. So just a couple items just to wrap up the business portion. Challenges, right? Tighter credit. I think that's kind of obvious if you've been paying attention to the news at all lately. Capital market concentration. A lot of investment these days is being funneled to what we'll call large cap companies, right? The big companies out there. And so smaller companies struggle to be able to attract capital. And there's a lot of concentration to certain markets. Technology is a big one. And so for external equity financing, it can be a challenge for small businesses to be able to find the people who are looking to be able to invest in their company because there's a lot of good alternatives out there. Increased price sensitivity by customers is a huge one, right? We hear about inflation almost every single day. Changes to prices are not unnoticed. So that's something, their costs are going up. How can they have to be more efficient and have to raise prices? Persistent inflation on wages and, always coming back for more. Everybody, right? Costs are going up. Employees are coming back asking for more constantly. And then supply chain disruptions based on, tariffs. I think that's a big one that has kind of petered out a little bit, but That was a big concern for a long time, and for some businesses it still is. Tariffs are creating a supply chain disruption. How do I find alternatives to the suppliers I'm using now, which creates a challenge to be able to rearrange their planning, to rearrange their purchasing process, and to deal with a whole new vendor relationship. And those are all things that are not solved in one day. Um, so I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to David to talk about development finance and URAs and some of the other local programs that are out there. I think we have a poll to start this out, Bobby. And David, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Mike. Good morning, everyone. As I mentioned, my name is David Starn. So I want to give some brief comments from the developer perspective about investment in your community in terms of what developers look for in terms of potential incentives to make projects pencil, what the toolboxes are, and I'll provide some case studies of some projects that I've been working on over the past couple of years, public-private partnerships between the developer and the city to help make these projects viable. So the question was, okay, here we go. Greatest challenges. So public perception, political resistance is number one, followed by complexity and administrative requirements. I assume this is related to entitlement approvals, getting approvals to build a project. So this is really helpful, and it's in line with what I'm seeing too from a developer perspective. So this kind of highlights kind of the capital stack. You kind of see here this exhibit. Typically, you have debt and equity, and then more and more importantly is the public investment. And I'll be talking more about this. Next slide. So I know Mike mentioned this before, but I guess I want to reiterate really the importance of this relationship between the public sector and the private sector in terms of how it benefits the community. One, from a municipal budget standpoint, particularly how development generates jobs, it generates tax revenue, whether it's sales tax or property tax. These all go to support a municipality's budget for providing services to that community, whether it's operational services, infrastructure investment. It's really kind of, Mike mentioned, it's really a wheel and kind of interrelationship between the public and private to make it work. And when kind of that relationship is broken, it makes things really difficult and really challenging. And if the community is perceived as a difficult place to invest in, to put capital in, to open a business in, whether it's real or not, developers and businesses won't come to that community. So I think it's really important to, and in the work that you do in economic development is so critical to showcasing the positive attributes of a community, and then working with your local governments, your planning departments, to help make it transparent and predictable, and frankly easy to build projects and bring in new investment that meets the community needs. I know a lot of projects, they may have political resistance, and so there's the aspect of kind of balancing the vision for what the community should look like with what the development will support. Next slide. So I'm going to talk about a couple of different public tools. You may have seen this slide before. So this is urban renewal and tax income financing. I know not all communities have TIF. Oh, here's the question. Here we go. Which development financing tool has the greatest impact in supporting new projects in the community? I'll pause here until we get through this. Okay. Wow, great. Okay, urban renewal. So that seems to be a pretty popular or well-utilized tool. So as you may know, this table is, or this chart here is, so basically, if you have a site or an area that you're trying to attract reinvestment in a city, or even a DDA can establish a urban renewal area where any type of reinvestment or new investment in that will generate new property taxes and also sales taxes. And that tax revenue over a period of years, up to 25 years, can be reinvested into what's considered public improvements, infrastructure, building facades, things that would serve a public purpose that will help close the financial gap to make projects pencil out and financially viable. Next slide. So the exhibit on the right is what I call the capital stack. So if you're a developer and you're trying to, say, build an office building or build a retail store or a manufacturing facility or, build a house, you have what's called debt and equity. Debt is, the bank debt, that you would get a loan for the project at an interest rate, and that could be 65 to 80% of the total project cost. And then the equity is what the banks consider skin in the game. And so this is what the bank will require that the owner put in terms of cash or other types of sources, even land. If they already purchased land value counts as equity for undertaking the project. And so that's a typical world, is this debt and equity. But a lot of projects today, particularly ones that are catalysts, that are really high profile, that may have different types of uses, the public sector is part of that stack. And so I really view the public sector, whether it's the DDA, whether it's the city or an urban renewal authority, they are a project partner. They are a co-developer with the developer. And so there's a lot of tools out there. Some are financial and some are not, that really can play an important role in closing what I consider the financial gap. Because if there's a gap in the project, whether it doesn't generate a sufficient return, banks have their own requirements in terms of how much debt they'll be attracted. They have certain ratios. If they aren't met, they aren't going to loan on the project. And so because of that, the project won't go forward. And so what I talk about, the but-for test, is what oftentimes DDAs or URAs or cities look for is, okay, if we, the city, are going to invest millions of dollars in a private project, but for this public investment, the project would not occur. And so it's that but-for test that I think a lot of municipal leaders, want to see, because you don't want to be viewed as overly subsidizing developers' return. You're just really investing in the public infrastructure or public financially to get that minimum hurdle to attract debt and equity to make the project viable and to be built. And so there's a lot of tools out there. From a municipal level, if the city owns the property, they can do land sales, concessions, or write-downs, meaning they can contribute land to a developer to build. As you mentioned, URA, the TIF. The TIF can be property tax, can also be sales tax. A really big one actually is infrastructure assistance. And so this could include on-site assistance, on-site infrastructure, but also a lot of times it's off-site, because if you're a developer and you're building, say, on a greenfield location, there may be utilities that may need to be extended to that site that the municipality would require the developer to pay for. So to the extent that the public sector can provide kind of that infrastructure, that really helps kind of close that financial gap and make things more financially viable. Another tool is what we consider development fee waivers, reductions. There's water fees, there's sewer, there's storm, there's sometimes affordable housing. There's lots of fees that really add up, that really can make it really challenging from a developer's perspective in their pro forma in terms of making the project viable. Another thing is ownership and maintenance of public spaces. So oftentimes a developer will dedicate public space, whether it's a park or some open space within the development, to the government for them to own and maintain. Again, this would help the developer's bottom line, because they would be responsible for owning and maintaining the spaces, which is a cost, over time. Another important one is environmental remediation. For an example, I'm working on a project in Thornton right now, where the city is an old shopping center where they have taken the lead and have remediated the site. It was had some old gas stations and stuff like that at their cost and liability. And so by doing that, we hope it's going to be attractive to the developer, because the developer won't be responsible for that liability and that cost. So in addition to municipal tools, there's other tools that you probably heard of. Special districts, Title 31 and Title 32. These are metro districts, business improvement districts, general improvement districts, and special improvement districts. And again, these are similar kind of like URAs where we can use bonds to pay for public infrastructure. Sometimes there's an additional mill levy that's used to do that. There's also other tools such as the federal opportunity zones and the Colorado Enterprise Zone that provide tax credits to developers to build certain types of housing or commercial development within designated census tracts. State of Colorado, as you probably heard, they passed the Prop 123 several years ago, and this has been a really powerful tool to provide affordable housing and also workforce housing. And so there's grants that are available in terms of acquiring for cities to acquire land to be used for affordable housing, to convey it to a developer. So there's lots of tools out there that can help kind of close that financial gap to make projects viable. Next slide. But I like to look at, and this is kind of maybe Mike expressed it before, but what I consider the public sector return on investment framework. And so you have the inputs, and the inputs in terms of what the city's investing. You invest incentives through either a URA, a big, frankly, tool can be credits for water and sewer taps. You could do property tax increment financing. You could do land concessions or land write-downs, infrastructure. All these are inputs into the developer's pro forma, which makes a project viable. And the output is the developer building the project. And this could be a redevelopment. It could be new commercial space, new restaurant, entertainment. It could be new housing. It can also include new public realm and civic spaces that meet community needs. And this outputs, they generate revenue streams back to the public sector. And this includes the taxes that are generated from the project, sales and use tax during the construction period, which can be fairly significant. And then ongoing, once the project is open, sales tax and property tax on an ongoing period. And then these revenue streams have overall kind of broader community benefits by really creating new jobs for people to kind of work in. It can be during the construction period. It can be, obviously permanent jobs once these projects are open. It can remove blighting conditions, again, removing environmental contamination of properties, and also providing new retail and new restaurant and entertainment to meet kind of what the community wants. There may be, and I'll talk about a project in Erie where Erie didn't have the right or didn't have supply of new restaurant and entertainment, and people were driving outside that community and spending their tax dollars in neighboring communities. And the town of Erie was like, hey, we would like to capture that sales tax here. And so by providing or entering into a public-private partnership, they are providing those opportunities to capture that sales and property tax within the community itself. Next slide. So this exhibit it's kind of showing there's different ways that urban renewal authorities can use tax increment financing. They can bond, or they can actually what's called pay as you go. And so when I talk about bonding, public issue bond on the far left, and there's different risk profile for the public and private sector. So on the left-hand side is more kind of higher level of public risk and lower of developer risk. And to the far right is less public risk and more higher development risk. And this is in terms of any potential defaults or if revenue is not generated. And so more higher public risk is what's called bonds that are issued by the public sector or by the urban renewal authority. COPs is one tool, but these are called certificates of participation. I worked on a project in Longmont. We had an old mall that was redeveloped by the developer. And in that instance, the city used COPs as the bonding tool to pay for public infrastructure. Now, in this instance, we had to leverage City Hall and city assets as collateral, but the project has performed incredibly well in terms of generating the needed property tax and sales tax towards bond repayment. And as you move to the right, the risk shifts over more to the developer side. And so this is where more what I consider shared risk, meaning it may be a bond that's issued, but the developer assumes repayment risk in terms of default, meaning they would have to guarantee the project, do a developer guarantee, or use something called credit guarantees. So if the revenue that doesn't generate to repay the annual bonds are not generated, the public sector doesn't assume that risk. It's more the developer. And as the far right is what we call pay-as-you-go TIF, meaning no bonds are issued, and the developer is reimbursed based on the actual TIF that's generated within the area as on an annual basis. So there may not be that. So if the project doesn't generate that TIF, the developer doesn't get that revenue. So that's more kind of on the higher risk side for the developer if the revenue doesn't materialize for what it was forecasted originally. Next slide. So I want to talk about two projects. One is in Louisville. So the two projects are in Boulder County. One is called Downtown East Louisville, or DLO. And so this was a 12-acre site, as you can see on the map here, just east of downtown. There was an old concrete batch plan. It was about 5 different parcels, kind of a blighted area. And our development group entered into a public-private partnership with the city and the Urban Renewal Authority to do a $65 million redevelopment. Next slide. And this is what it looks like today. This is the residential portion. So there's 130 apartments. There's a 30,000 square foot office building. There's some public spaces. And importantly, there's a connection to downtown Louisville. Next slide. So DLO, really one of the key importance to move this project forward was the vision that the community did. And so they adopted what we call the Highway 42 Revitalization Framework Plan. This is a URA plan. And they also adopted kind of the first mixed-use development and design standards to help kind of provide that vision for doing this project. The challenges were, as mentioned, it's an old concrete batch plant, and there's some geotechnical concerns that we had. We had expansive soil and undocumented fill. We had to spend about $500,000 in terms of soil work to make it, to build on the site. This site also had old mines. So in Boulder County, old coal mining communities, we had a couple mine shafts here. And so we had to mitigate, meaning we had to basically pump slurry down into the mine shafts, have them cure, basically harden, and then we were able to build on top. And so again, this was not an insignificant cost, and it was but for this public-private partnership that we were able to make this financially viable and work. We had to assemble property, 6 different parcels. We had to move an historic building. There's an old mining house that we had to move. The City Historic Preservation Commission did not want us to tear it down, so we had to spend a fair amount of money to move it to another part of downtown. And then the big one was connecting this site to downtown under the BNSF railroad tracks. Next slide. And so in terms of the capital stack, you can kind of see here, it was a $60 million private investment. We received about $4.5 million in urban renewal bonds for public infrastructure. This public infrastructure was a new pedestrian plaza, what we call the Cannon Street Werners. So if you look at that office building on the right there, this is a curveless street. Basically, it's called a Dutch living street. So it was an innovation. It hasn't performed as well as we have liked. We weren't able to activate the ground floor as much as we'd like to, but this is something that was designed and integrated into the project. And the big thing was the $3.1 million pedestrian underpass under the railroad, which connects downtown Louisville with our DLO development. You can see it, that underpass just to the left of the office building right here. And then with that, we provided 77 new public parking spaces. And so if you look at the capital stack, the amount of public investment, about 8%, not counting the other $3 million for the railroad, kind of really plays an important role in making this project viable, because but for that investment, we would not have moved forward with this project. Next slide. The second project I want to talk about is called Erie Town Center. So this one we're in the middle of it right now. And so this is a unique project where we have an urban renewal district on the entire, what we consider 45 acres. We have a metro district on the area in red, which is the residential area being developed by Toll Brothers, one of our development partners. And we have a business improvement district on the commercial property, which is highlighted in blue. And so as I mentioned, we have 145 single family and townhomes being developed by Toll, 206 apartments, that's the area in yellow, which would be developed by a Denver-based developer, and about 95,000 square feet of commercial space that will include retail, office, flex space, as well as a proposed food hall. Again, this is a public-private partnership within the town of Erie, Erie Four Corners Metro District in the bid, the Urban Renewal Authority, and Erie Four Corners LLC, which is the development entity. Next slide. So as I mentioned, back in 2022, the Business Improvement District issued about $21 million in bonds that were pledged by the URA TIF, the property tax increment, as well as an additional Metro District mill levy to provide early delivery of all the infrastructure. All the infrastructure is in now. This includes the roads, utilities, the public realm improvements. We have about 1.5 acre park there. And this is an example of a shared risk model between the town, the Metro District, and the bid and the developer. And one of the reasons why, the Metro District could have issued the bonds, but our development entity, which is primarily owned the property within the bid, it was more of a control thing. So we were able to issue the bond with the Metro pledging their mill levy and the URA pledging their property tax increment. Next slide. So you can kind of see here's some of the Toll Brothers houses that are done. They have about 60 homes built to date. So they still got another 80 to go. One of the unique aspects of this project is underground detention. So what's on the lower left there, that big giant yellow, basically is it's called a StormTech ADS system. And so on the corner where the commercial parking is, we have a 300 space parking lot. The entire stormwater for the entire site flows underneath the parking lot into this underground detention. So instead of having a 2-acre hole in the ground, as regional stormwater detention, we're able to more efficiently use the land. And again, but for this public investment, this partnership, this wouldn't be viable. This was a $2.5 million investment doing this underground detention. So this is a cost that a developer typically does not want to pay. But by using the P3 and working collaboratively with the Urban Renewal District and with the town of Erie, we are able to kind of be more efficient with our land use and provide kind of what we hope is a kind of a high quality mixed use project. Now we have received entitlement approval for the commercial. We're just waiting for an improving capital markets to get going on the vertical piece to kind of provide an update. Next slide.
Really quick,
So,
David, there's a
yes.
question in the chat section.
Sure.
When and why would you create a metro district?
So a metro district, so most may be aware, but most larger scale housing projects in Colorado, in many communities need metro districts to fund the infrastructure because the developer typically would have to pay for that. But through a metro district, again, it's an additional mill levy that you would bond against. And so obviously buyers of homes need to recognize that they're going to be paying higher property taxes because of the additional mill levy, but it provides that upfront capital to put in all the horizontal, which would enable the developer to kind of go forward in the vertical. So again, it's part of the capital stack, whether it's the city or a metro district, it's lowering that initial cost to make the project pencil and be financially viable. So just to kind of summarize, I have a comment here about when each TIF structure is appropriate. As I mentioned, going the publicly issued bond route is more suitable, what we consider for kind of a larger scale catalytic projects that really require substantial upfront infrastructure investment. As I mentioned, for our Erie Town Center project, this is would be $100 million plus project. The city rezoned the property that we're part of, went through an extensive public process that has significant community input. But this is really what this town hopes is really a catalyst for reinvestment in the town and capturing that leakage of retail sales and jobs that move out of Erie back into Erie. And again, this is appropriate when the city or Erie are seeking to jumpstart redevelopment or also leverage other public funding. And as you go down, kind of the smaller projects or lower risk, where the developer, would carry the cost. This is where a pay-as-you-go TIF, may be more appropriate. This can include, infill development, incremental development, a development of a certain, one building, for example, that doesn't justify a, bond issuance. So there's different ways that TIFs can be done. Again, a municipality or URA can use a TIF that is where they've already generated, and then fund improvements or grants to developers or business owners to renovate their buildings, based on the TIF that's already there. Or for more larger scale developments like Erie Town Center or the Twin Peaks Mall redevelopment of Longmont, bonds were needed to be done to kind of jumpstart development to provide the upfront capital, to be able to use to leverage other public financing. Next slide. And then lastly, again, key takeaways in terms of choosing the right URA kind of TIF structure is really kind of matching the risk to the project scale and revenue certainty. Again, larger projects with stable revenue potential may justify a bonded TIF, and smaller ones are better suited more as pay-as-you-go. Obviously, if it's a public sector is getting involved, you need to balance the public and private sector objectives. Public sector really seeks long-term, return on investment, infrastructure, and the impact of the redevelopment, meaning the jobs that are created, the sales tax that's generated. Again, going to help back to support the municipal budget and provide services, that generate from that project itself. But there's a lot of different tools out there. So again, in addition to URAs, there's BID, there's Metro District, there's GID, there's other types of bonds that can be used to complement URA TIF to really diversify the funding and reduce exposure on just that one revenue stream. And then really kind of prioritizing transparency and flexibility. I think Mike had mentioned this, but me wearing the developer hat, I think really providing a flexible process and predictable process goes a long way in making a community attractive to capital and for businesses and for developers willing to invest in a community if they know that the process, is transparent, it's flexible, and there's good, strong relationships among all the city departments, as well as the economic development folks as well. So with that, I think it's moving on to Stacy. So thank you.
Thank you, David. Yeah, Stacy. Stacy's going to cover municipal finance. I think that's a great way to finish it off and transition into Stacy's presentation. So Stacy, I'll let you go ahead and take it away. And I believe we're starting out with a poll.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Mike and David. So I think what's interesting a lot about this, and go ahead and go to the next slide, Mike, we'll talk a little bit about some of the traditional municipal funding options, right? Most people think property tax and sales tax. There's obviously some different key resources that some municipalities use, and it varies in every single municipality, and that's what's unique about it. For Kersey specifically, this is our specific budget that we had in 2025, and with economic development funding, you're always trying to create that property tax, both personal and real property, usually typically by bringing in primary employers. And then there's also the retail component, and some economic development organizations do have that responsibility and some don't. It just depends on your specific area. But from municipal standpoint, it is very important to ours. Is obviously, as you can see, 57% of our budget comes from sales tax revenue in Kersey. We do not have a large retail business population as well too, so it's very vital for us, and I always try to keep that balance between property tax and sales tax revenue too. We do have a lodging tax here of 4% in Kersey. We have one hotel, so it's not a lot, but it's a start, and so every little bit counts with that. And you can see too that we do have franchise tax, and those go to play. We just installed broadband throughout the community. So we got a franchise agreement with Allo Broadband, and then we have them with Excel Energy and different sources of revenue. They kind of all add up for us specifically. for that severance tax, we do have a small oil and gas presence as well, that does provide us some revenue on that. But again, that would have to be on like town-owned property and to receive the revenue on that. So, and then we have, some forms of revenue too, which we didn't include in this slide because we just shifted our budget to actually have a separate grant line item. But right now we're working with about $3 million in grant revenue to the town. But we do account for that too, as well as both funding coming in and then whatever the required match is. So huge resource for us. Our general fund's about 2 million. And then when you add in all the other sources, most of the enterprise funds, which is, the sewer and water and different entities, we have about a $5 million budget. And then we have grants on top of that, which is great. So next slide, please. So when you talk about expenses, here's the fun part, right? Where does all the money go? And you can see typically a lot of it goes to the personnel and administration. In this particular case with Kersey, 44% of the budget goes to our police department. And then 21% goes to administrative. And administrative covers a lot specifically for our department, both my position as well as our town clerk, our front desk, our deputy town clerk, finance, operations. There's a lot of that. So it goes into those particular jobs and their relative tasks as in regards to that too. So, and then we have a lot that goes into sanitation or sewer plant. That's, the third highest at 14%. So for us, we have a lot of money going out to several different entities. Kersey specifically right now is debt free. So we don't have any loans or obligations when it comes to those specific requirements. However, we do have enterprise funds and requirements to spend those money and make those monies whole. And in economic development, we look at that, right, as a tool and opportunity. When you waive fees, why can you waive some fees and not others? Because those fees, due to different state statutes or federal requirements, they have to remain whole. And we call those enterprise funds, right? So in previous jobs, I've been able to get some of those waived, but then we backfill them with an economic development fund. So collect them up front, reimbursement after the project gets going, you get a certificate of occupancy, then the economic development fund would reimburse those specific people. But that way it saved the development money because up front they didn't have to pay those fees that are required when they typically pull their permit. So we have a lot of, it's just different working on it from a municipal standpoint and looking at where do you spend the money. It's not just about specific requirements or wants and desires. You have obligations that come down that are required too. But typically what drives our spending here in most municipalities is our comprehensive plan, right? What does the community want to see? What do we want to grow on? And what does that look like? Next slide, Mike.
Actually, Bobby, we have
we have another
question.
poll. Okay. And I know we're getting a little tight on time, so and I'm a talker, so I'll try to talk fast, but definitely I think we're available after the fact if anybody has any questions to reach out to it. So yeah, and how would you describe your municipality's current fiscal condition? Yeah, it's adequate but tightening. It is definitely that way. We're seeing a lot of that. With our particular organization, we did not do merit raises this year. We just did cost of living, and it's always that balance of finding that. And I'm seeing that across all municipalities in Colorado from that standpoint. Specifically, when we talked about the infrastructure and the cost, and everybody is rising for that, whether it's for residential or commercial, across the board. The cost of cement, the cost of pipes, the cost of everything that goes into development, whether it's residential and commercial, is going through the roof. Then you have the legislative components that can add even more dollars to that as well, both mandated by federal and state regulations. Go ahead to the next slide. Yeah. So we talk about, financial statements, a lot what Mike went over with the specific private industry. We go through the same thing in responsibilities in the municipal world. We just have sometimes different terms, right? Like different terms, different terminology, but it's basically the same concept, money in, money out, assets, capital improvements. What are you spending your funds on? How do you show those and put those in the proper forms and statements and be transparent about it to the public, basically our stakeholders, right? The residents who live here and we're responsible to. So it's really just kind of the same concept. It's just, I will tell you that what's unique is that the terminology can be different and the requirements and how you track all that. So it's very, very different from that standpoint. Next slide. So, municipal debt, I mentioned specifically that Kersey does not have any debt, but what makes us valuable and what makes us have the ability to take on debt at a better scoring rate is really what you want to do for your community. So putting your community in a great fiscal state and position helps you to get not only more debt, but get it at a cheaper rate. Right? The higher your score is, the better you are, the better that you can secure bonds for specific projects. We have projects that we're going to be looking at that some are funded by grants and not to expand our wastewater treatment facility, right? Because without that infrastructure, you can't grow residentially or commercially because the sewer stuff needs to go somewhere. And you have to have a plant that can actually hold it. And ours is about 25, 30 years old, and capacity is only about 30% right now. But as we're looking to grow our community, both residentially and commercially, we have to be cognizant of that investment. And one of those ways, too, is also to save money to the residents and not have to put such a burden on the residents for those costs by having a higher rating and being able to secure those bonds. Next slide. So yeah, the vicious cycle of trying to perform balanced budgets, right? So do we have shortfalls? Do we have to increase taxes? And what's interesting here too is you can have these plans and studies done. Specifically, when I got here, we have had 10-year plan for wastewater and for water, and we put those plans into place, but they're pretty much antiquated the moment they get printed, meaning we have a scale for the next 10 years of what taxes are going to be increased on people's water bill and sewer bill to help keep up. And we are trying to get to the balance where we're just in the black with both the water fund and the sewer fund, and to finance that and to not put that burden on the residents who live here, but the cost of everything is going up. And we're beholden specifically, for example, to Central Weld Water District, where it's a pass-through. The water comes to our residents, it comes to us, we send out the billing. So if they raise their rates, we have to raise our rates. So when you look at that, it's just nonstop trying to get that extra revenue to come into our community and trying to be able to get the sales tax, to get the property tax to come in without having to always increase taxes. And those burdens and costs specifically can be struggling. Everybody knows how water is. In the state of Colorado, it's tough, right? So when a developer comes in and we don't have a cash and lose system for our water share, so they have to bring water units to the table, right, to develop. So, and we only use CBT units. So it's very complicated from the development standpoint of, well, now they have to provide their own water and bring that to the table, but we only have one source of it too. So we have a lot of different specific challenges and nuances that we have to deal with, as everybody does, and just trying to give a little bit of that background from what you look at on a municipal standpoint is a broader impact and a broader vision to see that kind of stuff. And I will just say that economic developers as a whole, how do you influence that too, is to really educate. And I know the EDCC has really been phenomenal at that, not only with the basic economic development courses, but nonstop with legislators. How do you educate? How do you get them to understand that? I've had previous jobs that have been phenomenal. Every single extra dollar that we had went into capital improvement, and that went to roads, water, sewer. And that makes your community more attractive overall from that standpoint, to attract those people who want to build in your community, specifically commercial, to allow the people that live there to get around easily in your community, but also to have that infrastructure in place to make your community a little bit more attractive as well. All right, next slide. So we have the municipal finance question number 3. What financial strategy should municipalities prioritize in the next 5 years? that's interesting. The P3s, right, of the world. I think to David's point, how he talked about and showed some very successful situations where that public-private partnership works, and they can look so different in every single community about how the government can play a role in that, right? Like how can they do that? Whether they pave the roads, whether they build the sewer, whether they do a private public partnership by donating the land, whether they waive fees. I'm really in support of incentives and being business friendly in community, obviously. And then there's the non-monetary things too that you can see with fast tracking commercial projects and making that policy known and putting that out there publicly that, specifically in past communities that I was involved in, our residential growth was through the roof. And so that takes time and capacity and with all of our planners and engineers, but we prioritized commercial and fast tracked it through the community. So I think you can kind of influence your elected officials, your staff by that educational component and um, and doing all of those different things for your community and trying to bring that value back in. And P3 is definitely one of them. I think that's a whatever that looks like, right? In your community, it can be as simple as non-monetary things. It can be as big as donating hundreds of acres of land to get things done. You do need to have that mindset and educate the staff around you. I always said, and I talked to other staff around me, like we need to understand where our money comes from, and that's from the business community, and then the residents who shop at what the business community builds, right? So our paychecks are basically being paid by those entities. Never asked anybody to break a rule or a law or anything that would put us in jeopardy from that standpoint, but understanding where your revenue comes from and why it's important, speed to market, and to get those companies and those organizations up and running and get those jobs in your community. It's just vital. And it's vital for not only the elected officials, but it's vital for your coworkers as well throughout your municipality to really understand that drive. Where does that revenue come from? And why are we doing the things that we're doing? Constantly telling that economic development story. All right, next slide. So I think I touched briefly on this a little bit. Some of the recent struggles that we've had has been the requirements from the state legislature to implement additional requirements on whether it's residential or commercial building. Specifically, when you talk about, for example, in the residential world, putting in charging stations into every house that are required, looking at specific materials that you have to build on your house for wildfires, doing all these things that are mandated, ADUs, all of these different things, but then the state doesn't offer any financial resources to help you implement those, to monitor them, to report them. So it can really have an impact on your budget. And we are a statutory town. We are not home ruled. So we have to follow a lot of those and don't have the option to simply write a resolution or ordinance to get us out of those things. So it can be complicated, very complicated and very burdensome to municipalities with all of those legislative changes that are coming, specifically in Colorado in recent years. Talk about aging and infrastructure deterioration. We have a lot of old pipes in Kersey. I'm just going to tell you that. So we just did a small Main Street project on one block and had more problems running into old pipes that we had no clue where they went, what they were doing, and they were just crumbling. So it's definitely a lot of surprises and definitely a lot of added financing components or dollars to a project with that standpoint. Housing affordability is definitely an issue with us. I mean, in Kersey, I think our average house still is like anywhere from 375 to 400,000 for a tiny little house in Kersey. And a lot of that has to do with lack of availability, right? So we are working on that, on affordable housing, on different things like that. And then it comes back to, do we allow residential builders to put a metro district on top of that, right? And how do we make sure that those residents who are purchasing those houses are aware that that extra mill levy is going to be on their tax bill every year? but it is sometimes the only way to get more housing in your community. We have to be a partner with that and have to work through those struggles by, getting metro districts pushed through, and they have to pencil out too, right? From that standpoint, yeah. Increased wages can also be a burden on municipal challenges. We're tiny here in Kersey. We have 19 in staff, but we're competing against Greeley, right? That's just 7 miles away, and Fort Collins and Loveland, because everybody's mobile. So we can't pay what those communities pay, but we still are expected to provide high quality service as we are. That's such a large municipality of that magnitude. So it's just a little bit difficult, but we do have at least a mobile workforce, I would say, in northern Colorado. But when you talk about that workforce challenges and constraints, I would say as the roads get heavier and busier, people want to drive less. So it does limit your pool that you can pull from, and it adds an added burden to that community with restrictions of, well, if you don't have housing for me to live there, but you have a great job, do I really want to drive that far to live there? So I think that's all I want to talk about for municipal challenges, but I'm open for more. Oh, we can talk a lot more about a lot of different things too.
No,
So.
for sure. The list is always growing, right?
Yes, for sure.
So yeah, I apologize. I know we're over a little bit. We're just going to wrap up here with, as I call it, walking the line as an economic developer. You guys have the distinct privilege of basically serving, your municipality and your business community. And so how do you apply this information? So, right, goals of economic developers, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because you guys already know this, right? You're trying to grow jobs and tax base and improve quality of life. And there are costs to what you do, which is if you're successful, if you're successful in what you do, increased users, right? Increased people, as Stacy mentioned, right? People driving on your roads, that increases the demand on the infrastructure, which actually requires more investment in infrastructure, which requires more money to be able to make that happen, right? Because there are large upfront costs. Um, as you'll hear from people in your community, right? Incentives are the devil, and they divert public resources. And so, this is part of the cost. Yes, there are incentives that do divert public resources, and really, this is spurring a long-term investment, right? This is a long game, and this is something that, as economic developers, we're really required to make sure that we communicate that, because these investments do pay off. Good investments pay off over time. And most of the time, right, over a 10-year period, people have short memories. And so they don't remember the amount of struggle that you went through to get that project through, that now all of a sudden is actually helping support the tax base that is keeping, the people in the community employed and keeping the roads maintained. Those are tough things for people to try to remember. So I just want to finish this off by just talking about your role, right? You are, and from my view, you are the person in the community. You're this ambassador. You're that liaison. Um, it really comes down to a lot about communication, right? Understanding your community, how it's positioned. So knowing about your community and your financial situation and the resources that you have available to be deployed, and really being the expert on those. Um, Understanding how changes in your tax code are going to impact your businesses. Again, businesses hate unpredictability. If I can budget for it, it's generally one conversation to be able to get it in the budget. If it comes in after the fact, that creates a whole tsunami of questions and challenges that have to be answered. So if it's a significant impact on your local businesses, it's going to be something that they need to be able to plan for. And so it's going to be on economic developers to make sure that they can do that. Advocate for changes that help improve the metrics that your businesses care about, right? Aligning those incentives. You are measuring this, we're measuring this. How do we make sure that we're rowing in the same direction? I've mentioned it before, right? Communicating changes in tax policy and tailoring these messaging to highlight the benefits. So this is the salesperson, the marketing person as an economic developer. How is this going to benefit them, right? You're not going to be able to control what changes happen generally, right? Your municipal leaders do. You have to message it, and you have to be able to communicate it, and you have to tailor it to the user to make sure it's relevant to them. Because if it's just a form email, chances are it's not getting read. Relevancy, concision, right? Being concise, being timely, and being thoughtful. If it's a huge ass email, I'm not going to read it. If I don't think it's relevant to me, I'm not going to read it. If it's too late, I'm not going to read it. And if it doesn't feel like it's really tailored to my business, right, thoughtful of my time, I'm not going to read it. And that's the way that most of the businesses are. They're being inundated every single day with communication. So making sure that your communication checks all the boxes, the things that they're going to want to read. And think about it from your own perspective. If it hits your inbox, what is it going to take to make you read it? And again, just concise. I want to thank Stacy and David for your time today. You guys, awesome. I really appreciate you bringing in your expertise. I appreciate all of you hanging in there for us. I apologize. I know I kind of took some extra time here at the beginning. If you have questions, I'm happy to stay after and answer questions that come up. But that is our presentation for today.
Everybody, let's give everybody a big round of applause, Zoom style. Thank you so much for our speakers today, and taking time with us to give us their expertise. I think that it was very concrete, good information that will really help all of us, move forward in our communities. So thank you again. Also, I wanted to give a shout out to our professional development committee. They are the ones that are working behind the scenes to, bring this relevant information to all of you. Again, all of this information will be housed on our website and be able to, access it at any time. So if you ever need to come back to it, it's going to be on our website. So thank you to Shannon and her entire team. Again, we're always putting out that shameless plug. If you want to participate, we've got 5 committees that our members can participate on and support the work that we're doing. I just talked about the follow-up items. Don't forget to save the dates: January 29th, Legislative Luncheon, Drive Lead Succeed, September 27th through the 30th in City of Cripple Creek. Basic Economic Development course, June 8th through the 12th. And for all other information, resources, tools, and the network, you will find everybody at on our website, edcconline.org. I wish everybody a big, happy holiday season. We can't wait to see you all in 26, but don't forget, we gotta celebrate us. We've got to celebrate the work we've done for our communities and celebrate Colorado. So happy holidays, everybody. We'll see you soon.